You're nobody." The words exploded from Sheikh Khalid al-Aziz's mouth as he stood in the glass-walled conference room of his Dubai headquarters, his expensive Italian suit perfectly tailored, his white gutra immaculate, his finger jabbing aggressively toward the black man in janitorial uniform who had quietly entered to empty the trash bins during what was supposed to be a private executive meeting. Marcus Thompson stood calmly near the doorway, holding his mop and cleaning cart, his work uniform worn but clean, his face maintaining dignified composure, despite the humiliation of being screamed at in front of a room full of shocked executives in $1,000 suits. But there was something in Marcus's eyes, a subtle, knowing expression, a quiet confidence that didn't match his position emptying garbage and mopping floors in a billionaire's office tower. Sheikh Khalid's face was contorted with contempt and rage, his body language aggressive as he leaned forward across the polished conference table scattered with contract documents and laptops, dismissing this janitor as beneath notice, as invisible, as nobody worth even basic human courtesy. Behind them, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing the glittering Dubai skyline, a dozen business executives watched the confrontation with uncomfortable expressions, some looking away in embarrassment, others frozen in shock at their boss's casual cruelty. On the digital screen mounted on the marble wall, stock charts and contract figures glowed, with numbers in the billions, the Al-Aziz Global Enterprises logo prominent above financial projections that assumed continued growth and dominance. What happened in the next 24 hours would destroy Sheikh Khalid's arrogance and cost him a $5 billion contract that would have secured his company's future, all because he had been too consumed with his own importance to recognize that the quiet janitor he had just publicly humiliated was actually someone whose opinion mattered more than anyone else in that room, and that this moment of casual cruelty was being witnessed by the one person who could ensure his empire's future or destroy it with a single phone call. Marcus Thompson had been working as a janitor at the Al-Aziz Tower for 3 months, one of dozens of invisible support staff who kept the gleaming office building functioning while executives conducted their important business. He arrived each morning at 5, clocked in with the other cleaning crew, and spent his shifts emptying trash, mopping floors, cleaning bathrooms, and performing the thankless tasks that kept the workspace pristine for people who never acknowledged his existence. His uniform was standard issue, slightly too large and worn from industrial washing. His hands showed the rough calluses of manual labor. He ate his lunch in the basement break room with other janitors and security guards, the only people who spoke to him as an equal. To everyone at Al-Aziz Global Enterprises, he was exactly what he appeared to be, another faceless worker performing menial tasks, forgettable and replaceable. But Marcus carried himself with a subtle dignity that occasionally made people look twice. The way he observed everything around him with sharp, analytical eyes. The way he seemed to understand conversations he overheard, processing business terminology and strategic concepts that should have been beyond a janitor's comprehension. The way he moved through spaces with quiet confidence, rather than the tentative invisibility most service workers adopted in environments where they weren't welcome. A few employees had noticed and wondered briefly about the janitor, who seemed somehow different, but in the rigid hierarchy of Al-Aziz Global, such observations were fleeting and ultimately dismissed as irrelevant. Marcus was there to clean, not to be understood or acknowledged. Sheikh Khalid al-Aziz was 45, a second-generation billionaire who had inherited a successful family business and expanded it aggressively through leveraged deals and political connections. His success had bred an arrogance that made him insufferable to work with and contemptuous of anyone he perceived as beneath his status. His company employed thousands, but he knew none of them by name and considered them interchangeable and disposable replaceable parts in a machine that existed to generate his wealth. He had built a culture where hierarchy was everything, where your worth was determined entirely by your position and wealth, where people like janitors and security guards were literally invisible, unless they made mistakes that inconvenienced someone important. His executives feared him rather than respected him. His employees avoided him whenever possible, and his business partners tolerated his behavior only because deals with him were profitable in the short term. It was a toxic environment, where cruelty flowed downward through every level of the organization, where treating subordinates with contempt was normalized, and even expected as a demonstration of power. The confrontation in the conference room happened during a crucial executive meeting where Sheikh Khalid was reviewing final preparations for a massive investment deal with Thompson Global, confident that the $5 billion contract was essentially closed, and congratulating himself on his negotiating prowess. Marcus had entered quietly to empty trash bins, a routine task he performed throughout the building multiple times during each shift. The meeting had been going for 2 hours, and trash had accumulated from coffee cups and food wrappers, standard protocol requiring it be removed during breaks. But Sheikh Khalid, stressed about final negotiations and running on too little sleep, exploded with disproportionate rage at what he perceived as an unacceptable interruption by someone who should have known better than to enter during an important meeting. How dare a janitor interrupt an executive meeting? Didn't he know this was private? Didn't he understand his place in the hierarchy? The tirade escalated quickly, with Sheikh Khalid calling Marcus incompetent for not somehow telepathically knowing that routine cleaning should be postponed, calling him stupid for not recognizing the importance of the people in the room, and finally declaring him nobody worth even acknowledging as a human being deserving of basic respect. "Get out!" Sheikh Khalid screamed, his face flushed with anger, his finger stabbing toward the door. "You're nobody. You're invisible. You exist to serve people who matter, and you can't even do that without disrupting important business. You're less than nothing to me. Do you understand?" Nothing. Several executives looked profoundly uncomfortable, but said nothing, conditioned by years of company culture to never contradict their boss, even when he was clearly being unreasonable and cruel. One younger executive named Amir had started to intervene, suggesting they just let the janitor finish quickly so the meeting could continue. But Sheikh Khalid had turned his fury on him as well, questioning whether Amir belonged in leadership if he couldn't understand proper hierarchy and the importance of maintaining clear boundaries between executives and service staff. Marcus maintained absolute composure throughout, his face calm, his posture dignified despite the verbal assault, saying nothing in his own defense. He simply nodded respectfully, collected his cleaning cart with deliberate care, and left the conference room quietly without arguing back or defending himself, playing the role of the properly submissive service worker that Sheikh Khalid expected. But as he walked back to the janitorial closet, passing other employees who looked at him with sympathy and secondhand embarrassment, something in his expression suggested this moment would have consequences that Sheikh Khalid couldn't begin to imagine. He pulled out his phone in the privacy of the storage closet and made a brief call, speaking quietly to someone on the other end, his tone professional and measured as he reported what had just occurred. Within an hour, the atmosphere at Al-Aziz Global began to shift in ways that the executives couldn't quite identify but definitely felt. Phone calls that should have been returned weren't. Emails that should have received immediate responses sat unanswered. The confident assumption that the Thompson Global deal was essentially finalized began to feel less certain as small signs emerged that something had changed. Within 3 hours, Sheikh Khalid received a formal notification that Thompson Global was withdrawing as lead investor in the consortium, citing concerns discovered during final due diligence that made the investment incompatible with their firm's principles. The message was professionally worded but offered no details, no opportunity for discussion, no chance to address whatever concerns had arisen. Within 6 hours, the other investors in the consortium, who had committed their funds contingent on Thompson Global's participation and legendary due diligence process, began pulling out as well, unwilling to proceed without the credibility and expertise that Thompson Global brought to any deal. Within 12 hours, Sheikh Khalid's stock price had dropped 15% as word spread through financial markets that something significant had gone wrong with the deal that was supposed to drive the company's next phase of growth. Analysts scrambled to understand what had changed so suddenly. What due diligence findings could possibly have caused such a dramatic last-minute withdrawal? Within 24 hours, Sheikh Khalid sat in his office, watching his empire begin to crumble in real time, trying desperately to understand what had happened, why Thompson Global had suddenly withdrawn without detailed explanation, why a deal that had been essentially finalized had collapsed overnight, leaving his expansion plans in ruins. His phone rang constantly, with panicked calls from board members demanding answers, from investors questioning the company's stability and management competence, from partners who had made commitments based on the expected capital infusion and were now scrambling to revise their plans. His stock continued to fall as analysts downgraded their ratings, questioning what problems the due diligence had uncovered, and wondering whether Alaziz Global had been concealing systemic issues. His expansion plans were now impossible without that capital. The land purchases and development agreements he had signed based on expected funding were suddenly liabilities he couldn't fulfill. His existing debt obligations were suddenly concerning to lenders because projected revenue wasn't going to materialize without the African and Southeast Asian expansion. Everything he had built toward for 2 years was disintegrating before his eyes, and he had no idea why. His assistant had been trying all day to reach someone at Thompson Global for explanation, leaving increasingly desperate messages, but all calls were being redirected to legal counsel, who would only say that the investment decision had been withdrawn based on due diligence findings, and that they wished Alaziz Global well in their future endeavors. It wasn't until the next morning that Sheikh Khalid received a courier delivery, marked personal and confidential, handed directly to him by a professional courier who required signature and identification. Inside the plain envelope was a tablet computer, already powered on and queued to play a video. Sheikh Khalid pressed play with trembling hands, desperate for any explanation of the catastrophe that had destroyed 2 years of work in 24 hours. He felt his blood run cold as he watched himself screaming at a janitor, calling him nobody, dismissing him with contempt that looked even worse on video than it had felt in the heated moment. The video was damning, showing him at his absolute worst, revealing the toxic arrogance he had always assumed was private and acceptable within his own company walls. But he still didn't understand what this had to do with Thompson Global, why a video of him berating a janitor would cause a $5 billion deal to collapse. Then the text appeared after the video ended, and Sheikh Khalid felt the world tilt beneath him. The message was from James Thompson, founder and CEO of Thompson Global Investments, one of the most powerful black billionaires in the world, and the man whose approval Sheikh Khalid had been desperately seeking for 2 years. The letter explained with devastating clarity that the janitor in the video, the man Sheikh Khalid had called nobody and treated with casual cruelty, was Marcus Thompson, James Thompson's son, the heir being groomed to eventually lead Thompson Global Investments and control over $200 billion in assets. The executive, who had been conducting undercover evaluation of Alaziz Global for 3 months, working as a janitor to observe the company's culture from the bottom up, to see how leadership treated employees when they thought nobody important was watching. The letter continued with professional precision, explaining that Thompson Global's investment philosophy was based on a fundamental belief that companies with toxic cultures and leadership that treated employees with contempt were bad long-term investments, regardless of their financial projections, that organizations built on foundations of cruelty and disregard for human dignity inevitably collapsed as talented people left, as reputation suffered, as the character failures of leadership manifested in business failures. The letter noted that Marcus had spent 3 months evaluating Alaziz Global from the perspective of its lowest-paid workers, and had documented a systematic pattern of toxic behavior that started at the very top with Sheikh Khalid himself and permeated downward through every level of the organization. The letter was devastating in its calm professionalism, noting that while Sheikh Khalid's company might be financially successful in the short term, it was built on a foundation that would inevitably crumble. The letter concluded by noting that the $5 billion investment would instead be directed to companies that demonstrated both financial potential and ethical leadership, and wished Sheikh Khalid well in examining whether the character he had displayed was truly who he wanted to be. Sheikh Khalid sat frozen in his chair, the tablet still in his hands, understanding with sickening clarity that his own arrogance and cruelty had cost him everything he had worked toward. That moment of casual contempt, that explosion of rage at someone he had assumed was powerless and irrelevant, had been witnessed by literally the most important person he needed to impress. The janitor he had screamed at, the man he had called nobody, had been a billionaire's son conducting evaluation that would determine his company's future. He had failed a test he didn't know he was taking, had revealed his true character in a moment when he thought nobody who mattered was watching, and now he was paying a price that might take years to recover from, if recovery was even possible. His company's stock had lost over 30% of its value in 36 hours. His expansion plans were dead. The contracts he had signed were liabilities he would have to negotiate out of at significant cost. His credibility with investors was severely damaged, with several major shareholders already calling for his resignation. And word was spreading rapidly through business networks about why Thompson Global had withdrawn, about the existence of a video showing his behavior, about the janitor who had turned out to be someone whose opinion could make or break billion-dollar deals. The humiliation was comprehensive and public, and there was nobody to blame but himself. The story became legendary in business circles within weeks, told and retold as a cautionary tale about character, about how you treat people when you think nobody important is watching, about the dangers of arrogance that blinds you to the humanity and potential importance of every person you encounter. James Thompson gave interviews to business publications about his unconventional evaluation methods, explaining that he had learned over 50 years that the best predictor of a company's long-term success wasn't their financial statements, but rather the character of their leadership and how they treated people who worked for them, especially those with the least power. He explained that toxic leaders might generate short-term profits through fear and intimidation, but they invariably destroyed long-term value through talent loss, reputation damage, and poor decision-making born of surrounding themselves with people too afraid to speak truth. The video of Sheikh Khalid's tirade was never released publicly out of respect for privacy and legal considerations, but the story of what had happened spread nonetheless, and Al-Aziz Global became synonymous with toxic leadership and the consequences of character failures. Before we wrap this story up, I'd like to thank you for reaching this far. And if you enjoyed this story as much as I think you did, then be sure to show your support by liking and subscribing so this channel can reach more people like you. Now, back to the story. For Sheikh Khalid himself, the experience forced a reckoning that was ultimately transformative, though painfully slow. The loss of the Thompson investment exposed vulnerabilities that led to 2 years of financial struggle, layoffs, asset sales, and restructuring. He underwent therapy, hired leadership coaches, and began the difficult process of changing the culture he had created and becoming a different kind of leader. He personally reached out to Marcus Thompson 6 months later, requesting a meeting that Marcus granted. Though without any promise of forgiveness, Sheikh Khalid apologized sincerely, acknowledged the harm he had caused, and asked for guidance on how to change. Marcus respected the humility, but was clear that changed behavior over time, not words, would demonstrate whether the transformation was real. Sheikh Khalid implemented sweeping changes in company policy around workplace respect, hired an entirely new senior leadership team committed to cultural transformation, and spent years rebuilding a reputation destroyed in one moment. His company survived, but never fully recovered its previous trajectory, a permanent reminder of the cost of character failures. And Marcus Thompson went on to lead Thompson Global Investments with the same philosophy his father had instilled, evaluating companies not just by their balance sheets, but by their character, understanding that true leadership was revealed not in how you treated equals, but in how you treated those with less power than yourself. Building a legacy that proved ethical business and profitable business were not contradictory, but complementary principles that separated truly great organizations from merely successful ones.